Hello and welcome. Today I'll be giving the first tutorial, which will be the first mission in the Crimson Stone box set. So the tutorial missions are aimed at teaching new players how to understand the rules for Infinity and 4 and to progressively build upon the complexity of the rules. So this first tutorial is designed to give you a very simplified version of Infinity's core mechanics. And this is basically what you'll be doing in every game. Around about 95% you'll be doing these core mechanics, and once you understand this, you'll pretty much understand how to play the game. And so every mission after this will slowly add more and more rules to help flesh out the full basic core rules to play the game effectively. Okay, so I'll just talk about the armies for both sides first. So this is the Ariadna army for the Cosmoflot sectorial. Now this mission for the tutorial will require 3 rockets, as you can see here. Now I'll just briefly go over the unit profiles so you understand. Okay, the Li up here represents the unit's infantry type. So Li stands for light infantry. And then underneath this, it basically shows you what kind of order the unit generates. So it generates a regular order per miniature. Okay, now each miniature has similar attributes. The first one is MOV, which stands for movement. And you'll see there's 2 numbers, 4-4. So the order skill consists of one entire order, or either a short movement skill and another short movement skill, or a short movement skill and a short skill. And that'll be explained a bit further. So your first 4 is the total amount of inches a miniature can move in its first short movement skill, and the second 4 is the maximum number of inches a miniature can move in its second short movement skill. CC stands for close combat, and their ability or attribute is 14. BS is ballistic skill, their attribute is 10. PH stands for physical, so a soldier's physical ability to carry, dodge, move, climb, etc. That is 11. Whip stands for willpower, and this represents basically the intellectual characteristics of a unit, and that is 13. ARM is short for armor, so this unit has 1 armor. BTS, which stands for biotechnological shield, is basically anything to deal with hacking programs and other types of weapons that attack the unit's biological aspects. And obviously it is represented with a 0. W is wounds, so this miniature has 1 wound. S is size or silhouette, which is 2, which is standard for most infantry units. And AVA is availability. That means you can have a total of 5 in the sectorial, or for this mission, I should say, the tutorial. We won't get into special skills at this stage. We'll just focus on the main attributes. Okay, and so for this tutorial, every rocket has the rifle, even though actual miniatures have a shotgun, submachine gun, and a rifle. The thing is with the Corvus Belli's and miniatures, they do not all come with all unit weapon loadouts. So you have what's called proxy. So that means as long as you have the unit or the miniature that represents the unit, it doesn't really matter what weapon is in their hands as long as you specify during the game this is what they have. So for this tutorial, all rockets have the rifle. And so the damage of the weapon, so how much it actually hurts the target miniature, is 13. B stands for burst, which is 3. So during an active turn, you roll 3 dice, 1 dice per burst. Ammunition is N for normal, so there's nothing special about the ammunition. And the saving roll attribute that the opposing player has to roll against is armor. And down here are the range modifiers. So if you were to shoot a target within 8 inches, so it's 8 inches or less, you get no modification to your BS skill. For 16 or less, but above 8, you'll get +3 to your ballistic skill. 32 inches or less, but +16, you'll get -3 to your ballistic skill. 48 inches or less, but above 32, you'll get -6 to your ballistic skill. And anything outside above 48, you cannot engage the target, so you won't fire. Okay, the other unit, the Nomads player for the Corregidor sectorial, is the Aguaseals. And once again, very similar stat line. Okay, the only real difference is their ballistic skill is 11 and their physical is 10. And they're also light infantry, and just disregard this symbol, doesn't really mean much at the moment. And they also generate a regular order. And as you can see, their weapon for all profiles, and as you can see, each miniature reflects this, is they have the combi rifle. So it's very similar to the rifle. Once again, damage is 13, burst is 3, ammunition is normal, saving attribute is against armor. The only real difference is they don't have the very short range band. So basically anything 6 inches or less, you get a +3 to your ballistic skill. Okay, so as I said, this is the first tutorial, and this will teach you the basic game mechanics of Infinity. And you'll find that this is the mechanics themselves are designed to be a very dynamic game. So unlike most tabletop miniatures, you'll have a turn-based system which is basically a war of attrition. You get the first turn, you do as maximum damage as you can, and then the opposing army attacks back in the second turn with whatever troops they have remaining, and you just slowly whittle each other away. That doesn't happen in Infinity per se, because you have what is called an automatic reaction order. So whoever's in their active turn, you as the opposing player, you actually get to act against the active player. Now, obviously, some of your actions are limited to only ARO choices, which is fair enough, but they are quite significant what you can do. So you can either dodge, ballistic skill. You can dodge, you can shoot back, you can, if you're in close combat, fight back, which is all that's required for this tutorial. But there are some actions that you can do against the player. So it's very dynamic in that sense. You're not just standing there taking the shots, you can actually shoot back. Okay, so my wife and I played a game, and I ended up taking photos of the positions of the troops and recording the dice rolls and everything. So this game is based on an actual real-world game, but I've designed it in a way that's simplified so you can actually understand the rules step by step. And so this will be quite a long tutorial initially. I'll go through and explain what orders are, how to measure distances, what a success value is, line of fire, the 2 types of rolls, the initiative and deployment sequence, the game sequence, what orders are, and some of the limited skills that we have here. So this will give you the basic core foundations, and once you learn this, these won't need to be elaborated in future tutorials, but for any future tutorials, any new skill that is brought in, I will elaborate on them so you can understand them. However, I'm not going to insult your intelligence. I do expect you to pick up with relative ease, hopefully, on my behalf, on how to play the game. So without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. Okay, so here, this is the terrain setup that comes provided with the Crimson Stone mission set. So just let me put the laser on. Okay, so this is the terrain map. It is 24 inches by 32 inches. And this line here is your deployment zone. So you have a deployment zone of 8 inches deep, 24 inches across the map. So you can deploy your troops anywhere within these deployment zones. And in between the deployment zone, there's a no man's land of 16 inches. Okay, so these are various terrain pieces. These are the buildings. The small light colored blue ones are a small building, and they're on top of the larger blue ones. These are just like short and high cover pieces, and this is just a more high cover piece. So the terrain pack, the battle map has been set up according to this. Not quite 100%, some things are probably an inch or two either side, but I've set it up as best I can for the game, and you'll see that in the photos. So the first thing you do is you set up the terrain pack for the game you're playing and lay out the terrain. So this gives enough cover to block most of line of fire between either deployment zone, with enough cover items in between to give you a cover advantage, but open enough so you can't always reach the next piece of cover. Okay, so once you've set up your terrain pieces, the first thing you roll for is initiative or deployment. So this is basically who decides goes first and who deploys first. Now, this is sort of explained a bit more in the second tutorial, but I'll do it in this one because I believe this is actually a foundation, a core foundation for the game, because you need to understand this as well. So basically, initiative means who takes the first turn. So who gets to be the first active player in a game round. Now games normally go for 3 rounds, and within those rounds you have turn 1 and turn 2. And you decide who gets to take the first turn and be the active player first. Deployment is basically who deploys first. Now, in most traditional war games, it is if you win, you get to deploy first and go first. Well, Infinity, it's quite different because deployment actually has a distinct advantage. So if you choose to take initiative, you can choose to go first, or you can choose to go second and let your opponent go first. Because some tournament mission packs, sometimes it's advantageous to go second and not first, because you get the very last turn, and the very last turn you can claim the objectives and win the game. So it's unlike traditional games. It's, you can actually bring back and win the game in the last turn. With deployment, that's also very interesting because depending on your opponent's army, you might want to see where they set up first and then deploy your troops accordingly to counteract their troops. So that's quite the unique advantage that you have, and sometimes it's actually beneficial to let your opponent deploy first, so you can see where they're putting their heavy pieces, their specialist pieces, or various other camouflage pieces on the battlefield, so you can set your military up against it to work effectively against their deployment. So both have a distinct advantages. Okay, so how do you decide who takes initiative deployment? Well, you use the whip of the miniature. Now, normally it's the lieutenant's whip, but that'll be explained in the next tutorial. So we just go off the whip of the 3 or the main miniatures, the Aguaseals and the Rockets. So they're both 13. So we're basically rolling off to whoever gets 13 or less, and whoever gets the highest will determine who wins. Okay, so I rolled, and I'm playing the Nomads here, so I got a 3. And my wife rolled and got a 20. So 20 is higher than 13. So that's a fail. And even though I scored low, it's under 13, so that means I succeed. So I choose initiative, and I choose to take the second turn, mainly because of the narrative style of the tutorials. It's always Ariadne that's doing the assault in the narrative aspect, so I always want Ariadne to go first for these tutorials, except for the last one. I'll make it even then. You can see the advantages and benefits of taking initiative. So for the sake of the narrative purposes, I took second turn, and my wife decided to take deployment and deploy second. So in other words, she decides to see where I set out my deployment, my miniatures on the table. Okay, so I deployed my Aguaseals here, here, and here. And my wife deployed her rockets here, here, and here. Now she did that because obviously I was going second, so she decided to put her units more exposed to take advantage of moving into the middle zone here, the midfield. Okay, so it's just a photo of the Nomads deployment side. As you can see, I've done my best to reflect the map layout that's provided in the tutorials. So once again, Aguaseal, 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 and the Adriana deployment, Rocket, Rocket, and Rocket. Okay, round 1, turn 1 for Ariadne. Okay, so first up, for every miniature on the table field that is not in a null state or a dead state, it generates 1 order. So the Ariadne team would have generate 3 regular orders. Now to use these orders, these regular orders can be spent however you want. You can spend 1 order per miniature, or you can spend all 3 orders on 1 miniature. Sorry, 1 order on each miniature, or all 3 orders on just 1 miniature. So it's really up to you, the player, to determine how you spend your orders. And this is one of the core components of the game. It's not about, unlike traditional games where every unit gets a possibility to move and shoot, it's really orders. This is the fuel or the money for your unit, your army, to complete objectives and to win the game. So you have to be very careful with how you spend your orders and how you plan your attack. Okay, so the first order is spent, and the Adriana player chooses to do the first short movement skill of move. So they move up to there within their 4 inches. Okay, now this is the first short movement skill of an order. And so now the opposing player, the reactive player, which is the nomads, gets to have an automatic reaction order. So the nomad player chooses to dodge. And then once that's declared, the Adriana player chooses the short skill, which is the second half of their regular order, which is ballistic attack. Okay, so this unit here is going to attack this unit here. So what's important? Well, to dodge, you have to dodge using your physical skill. So it's 10. Now for here, we have the rifle, and this is where range becomes important and how it modifies your attributes. So once you've declared your order, once you've done what you're going to do in your order, then you measure all your distances and roll. So the distance between these two miniatures is 15 inches. And as you can see, that is higher than 8, but less than 16. So the Ariadne player gets +3 to their ballistic skill. Okay, so they start off with the ballistic skill of 10. Because they're shooting within an effective range for their weapon, they get +3 to the BS. So their success value is now 13. So in order to score a hit, the Ariadne player must roll a dice and get 13 or less. And because it's an active turn, they get 3 Bs, so they get to roll 3 dice. The Nomad player just rolls 1 dice on a score of 10. So the Nomad player needs to get 10 or less. So the dice are rolled. Now, as you can see, for the ballistic side, 18 is higher than 13, so that's a miss. The 8 and the 6 are both successes. And for the Nomad player, the 8 is also less than 10, so that's also a success. So what happens here, however, is now it goes down to who has the highest. So the 8 for the Nomad's player cancels the 6, and the 8 is both the same. So because both units rolled the same dice, not one is better than the other, so nothing really happens this turn. So that's what happens. Higher wins cancel out lower wins, but if they're both the same, nothing happens. It just cancels each other out. So that's essentially what happened. Nothing happened because no one actually scored a win. So a second order was spent. Once again, it was the same rules, but instead of doing a short movement skill, it was an idle. And then just going through the BS attack skill. So to speed it up, because it's exactly the same as the first order, except instead of short movement skill move, it was short movement skill idle. Work out the range again, ballistics 10, within 16 inches, and outside 8, so it's +3 to BS. Success value 13. And again, I'm dodging on 10. Dice are rolled. So the 18 is higher, so it's a fail. The 10 is less than 13, so it's a success, it's a hit, and the 3 is less, it's a hit. And because I rolled an 18, it's above, so it's a fail. So the Adriana gets 2 hits against my miniature. So that means I have to do an armor roll. So I have to get less than the weapon's damage. So the damage of the weapon is 13. So I need to get higher than 13 to not take a wound. And the armor will come into effect in this in a sec. Yep, so my armor for my unit is 1. So I roll 2 dice because I took 2 hits. Now 20 is obviously higher than damage 13, so that means I'm saved from that wound. 9 is less than 13, so what you do here is you add your armor and your cover bonuses. So 9 plus 1 for armor is 10. I'm still short 13, so that means I fail one of the hits and I take a wound. Now there's 2 ways to work out your your save. The easiest way is just to roll the dice, add your armor and your cover saves to the score, and if it's higher than the weapon's damage, then you pass. Or traditionally, what most people do is they go, okay, the damage weapon is 13, because I have 1 armor, that reduces it to 12, and then I have to get 13 or more to succeed. Because if you get So the way you fail is that if you get equal to or less than the weapon's damage, you take a wound. If it's above that, you succeed. So you need to get 14 or more to succeed. So obviously 9 plus 1 is 10. 10 is less than 13. My miniature takes a wound. And I'll put an unconscious token next to it. Now this is sort of explained a bit further on in the tutorials, but however, I think this is a core attribute and it's handy to learn now, because obviously once you learn it now, the more games you play, the more repetitive it becomes. So you have one wound, okay? If you take your wounds down to 0, your miniatures are not dead, they're considered unconscious, because within Infinity you have characters that are doctors and they can actually revive your units. So if you go down to 0 wounds, it means you go into the unconscious state. If you go less than 0, so in other words, if I failed both of these hits, I'd go into -1. That means my miniature is killed and it's removed from the tabletop. Okay, so 0 wounds means I'm unconscious. The miniature stays on the tabletop and has an unconscious token to let people know that, yep, it's unconscious. But if I failed both, then I'd go -1, and that means I'm dead, so I remove the miniature from play. But because I'm just down to 0 wounds, I go unconscious. Okay, and it's just a photo of that battle. Here's the Ariadna player, that's the Nomad player. Okay, so there's still one more order. So spending another order, the Ariadna player chooses the first short movement skill of move and moves this up to 4 inches. So it couldn't quite make it into cover. And the Nomad player declares none because I have no line of fire to the opposing player. So to understand why there was no arrows declared, you can only have an arrow declared for this tutorial if you have line of fire to the active miniature. So because this one is in full cover, I had no cover to see their movement. And on the game table, this miniature here had no, it could only see down there. It couldn't see the miniature that moves. So because you have no line of fire to the movement path of the opposing miniature, I can't declare an arrow. And so with that, the second short movement skill move is declared, and the Ariadna player moved the unit into cover up against the building. And that's the end of Ariadna's turn in the first round. So as you can see, moved up here, or just let me check. Sorry, yeah, this is a bit of a different photo. Sorry, but both units end up moving here, and this one's still here. Okay, so it's round 1, still the first round, but now it's turn 2, the Nomad player's turn. Okay, now because one unit is unconscious, I still have 2 miniatures that are not unconscious or in a null state or a dead state. So now that means I generate 2 regular orders. So as you can see, because of the first turn advantage, I'm now at a disadvantage because I've taken a wound, and now I have 2 regular units. Sorry, I'm just having a drink. So obviously my ability to dodge was not as good as what I thought it was. So I spend 1 regular order, and I declare my first short movement skill, which is move. And I move this unit forward up to 4 inches. The Ariadna player declares dodge, and then I choose BS. So I choose my next short skill of my order as a ballistic attack. And I'm shooting down at this unit because now I've moved in line of sight, I can see. Okay, so we measure for range, 16 inches on the dot. Now I have ballistic skill 11, so it's 1 higher than the Ariadna player, but it generally doesn't mean that much in the actual game. Because it's 16 inches, I'm within the effective weapon range of my weapon, so I get +3 to ballistic skill. So my success value is now 14 or less to succeed. The Ariadna player needs a physical roll of 11 or less to succeed. So we roll dice. Okay, So my 17 is greater than 14, so it's a miss. My 10 and 8, however, are underneath, and they succeed, so they're a hit. Now, the rocket player, the Ariadne player also succeeds by getting under 11 with a 5. Now what happens here is my 8 cancels the 5, and my 10 is higher as well, so I get 2 hits in this case. So even though the Ariadne player succeeded in the dice rolls, because we're facing off against each other, because I've got the higher values, but I still come under my success value of 14, I actually win the dice roll. So now the Ariadne player has to make an armor save. So the damage of a combi rifle is 13. They have +1 armor. Now because they're in the open, they get no cover save, so they've only got the 1 armor. And so because they took 2 hits, they rolled 2 dice. And as you can see, 7 + 1 is 8, 4 + 1 is 5. It is significantly less than 13, and so this miniature takes 2 wounds. So because they have 1 wound, 1 foul means to go to 0, which will put them unconscious, and then they have another foul, which means go into -1, and so that means they're in the dead state. So that miniature is entirely removed from the battlefield. And here's a perspective here. Here's the Nomad player, and it's the Ariadne player. Okay, I still have 1 order left, so I spend that order, and I choose to nominate short movement skill, and I move this miniature up to this end here. Okay, now my opponent declares an automatic reaction roll of a ballistic attack. So this miniature here happens to see this one. I know it's not really represented on the map, I apologize, but they can see just through that crack and have a go. And I decide to dodge because I want to get out of that line of fire and into better cover up here. Okay, so I'm dodging, so I need a physical of 10 or less, and again, they are doing a ballistic skill. So from here, we measure the distance. It is 18 inches. So as you can see, it's higher than the effective range of the weapon and lower than 32, so it's in the in a less effective range. So the ballistic skill for an Ariadne player for the rocket is 10, -3 for range, gives them a success value of 7. For me, I have a physical of 10. Now this becomes interesting because the 10 is actually higher than the 7. Now in ARO, you only get 1 burst, 1 shot, not 3. In the active turn, you get to fire your full burst. In the ARO, every unit gets 1 dice to shoot back with. So it's basically 1 die against 1 die, and I sort of have the advantage here because I'm 10, which is higher than a 7. So we roll the dice, 2 and 12. So obviously 12 is higher than 7, so that was a miss. And even though it's 2, it's a low number, it's less than 10, so it's a success. So because of that, if you succeed in a dodge, you have up to a total of 2 inches to move. But because my cover is only 1 inch away, I choose to move 1 inch into cover. And that is the end of my turn for round 1. So as you can see, unconscious, moved up into here, and I move from there to there. Okay, round 2, turn 1 for Ariadne. Now, because there's only 2 miniatures left on the board, they generate 2 orders. Spending 1 order, our opponent declares short movement skill of move, and they move down and back. I declare ballistic attack, and my opponent declares ballistic attack. So now we have a shoot off essentially. Now you're probably thinking they moved out and moved back. How can I get line of fire? Well, in their rules, it states where you move along your movement length, you as the active player can choose where to shoot along that movement distance. And me as the reacting player can get to choose where to engage from that reacting distance. Okay, so even though my opponent moved out and back, they have to have line of fire because they have to now because I moved here. They've nominated to shoot from this perspective, from this point along their movement. So it was 2 inches out behind cover, get line of sight, shoot back, and then duck back into cover. So they've nominated to shoot from this point on their movement length. And for me, because that's the only way I can shoot back, is I've nominated to shoot at that same point as well. Now, if this was just a straight move out, I could choose anywhere along that movement length. Because it's a move out and back into cover, we can only really effectively choose to shoot at this point. Okay, so because it's 17 inches, it was outside the effective range for the rocket player. So, and because I'm now in cover, they get a -3 ballistic, -3 to their ballistic attribute. So they get a success value of 7. However, the same applies to me. It's outside my effective range, I get -3 to ballistics, but because the rocket is in cover, I also get -3 to my ballistic skill. So now I'm down to 5. Sorry, this is actually incorrect. This should say 4, not 7. This is 4. Apologies. So it's my 5 against Ariadne's 4. Now, because of the active player, they get to roll 3 dice, and I just roll 1 dice because I'm reacting. Obviously, none of them hit. They all fail. And this is what it looks like. I've moved the miniature in to give it a bit more of a dramatic effect, but obviously the miniature is actually back here, but we're shooting from this point here. So nothing succeeds because all of our shots fail. Okay, the next regular order, sorry, the mouse keeps clicking and sometimes it double clicks the animations, so that's why you didn't get to see the outcome of that properly. And it's basically the same again. You know, move down here, back into cover, I react with a BS and my opponent reacts with a ballistic attack. So once again, yep, mistake, there should be 4, apologies, and 5. So my 5 against my opponent's 4. Okay, now as you can see, everything's higher than 4, and this is higher than 5, so we fail again, and nothing happens, and that's the end of the turn. So this is where we end up now for Ariadne. Okay, round 2, turn 2 for Nomads. So now it's my active turn in round 2. So because I've only have 2 models on the field that are not in a null state or dead, I only get 2 regular orders. I spend a regular order, I declare my first short movement skill of move, and I move 4 inches forward, closer towards enemy. And at this stage, because this miniature is in cover, there's no line of fire to this miniature. So my opponent declares no arrow because they cannot see anything to do anything against me. So with that, I declare dodge. Interesting, I should have declared, that should actually say move, apologies. And then I move another 4 inches. Now you're probably thinking, why move and not dodge? Well, because if I'm getting shot at, I have to declare a dodge. Because you do not roll a dice for movement, and so then it becomes a normal roll, and then that gives the advantage to the opposing player. But because I have no line of fight, no arrow declared, that's just a normal move skill. Apologies, still learning how to use PowerPoint to do this tutorial. So that technically should say move, and I just moved another 4 inches because I've got nothing to dodge against. Like no one was shooting at me or acting against me, so I can just do a normal move. So I chose to move and move a total of 8 inches to this point of cover here. Okay, 1 order remaining. I spend that last order. Again, I declare move for my first short movement skill, and now I'll move this miniature up to the building. Because my opponent has no line of fire to that miniature, they cannot declare any AROs. And then I'll declare my second skill of move. And I just bring it up to the corner, not quite exposed to this unit, still in cover, but just closer. And that is the end of my turn. So as you can see, the miniature is here and here. So I'm still out of line of fire for the Ariadne player. Okay, round 3, turn 1, Ariadne. Now because they have 2 miniatures, they generate 2 regular orders. Spending 1 order, They declare the first short movement skill of move. And again, move this miniature out and back into cover. I declare BS attack, and they declare BS attack. So it's the same as the previous round. We're both shooting here. The range is 10 inches, so we're well and truly within our effective weapons range. Now, because I'm in cover, the +3 to range is negated by the -3 for cover. So the success value for my opposing player to succeed is 10, which we call flats, rolling on flats. Same applies for me, rolling on flat, 11. And as you can see, this is the results of the die. I fail, and my opponent has 1 hit. Now I have to get higher than damage 13. I get a 20, so it's a success. I don't even have to add my armor and cover value. It's above 13, it's a success. And what I haven't included here, sorry, is the guts roll. And it's not explained in this tutorial, but a guts roll is if you manage to take a hit and you pass your armor save, you're meant to take a guts roll, and then that determines whether you stay where you are if you win, and if you fail, you have to move up to 2 inches into cover to no longer have line of fire against you. And it's basically to sort of represent the fear of being shot at, and even though you succeeded, it's meant to be like, okay, I've just been shot at, I need to get better cover. But that's not reflected in this tutorial. That will be in the second tutorial. So spending the last remaining regular order, again, pretty much the same as before. These two shoot off. So yep, it's within range, get +3. Because I'm in cover, my opponent gets -3 to hit me. And so it's a flat roll of 10. And the same for me, +3 for my weapon range, -3 because my opponent's in cover. Success value was 11. So again, we roll the die. I fail. My opponent gets a critical and 2 misses. So this is an interesting concept. It's the critical. So if you get the exact amount of success value that you need, it's called a critical. So let's just say I had a 10 and my opponent had a 10. Even though I pass because they got a critical, that means that critical cancels my success. And all criticals will cancel opponent's success unless both players get a critical, and then both criticals cancel each other out so nothing happens. Okay, but my opponent scored a critical hit, so now that means I have to take, even though it's 1 successful hit, it is a critical, and every time you get a critical for a hit, the opponent has to make an extra armor save. So it's 1 hit, but I have to have 2 armor saves now. So yep, damage 30 in the weapon. This is what I roll. Okay, so I'm in cover, I've got 1 armor. So being in cover grants the miniature +3 to the armor value. So 10 plus 1 armor is 11, +3 for being in cover is 14. So this is a success. So I don't take that hit. I'm saved by that hit. However, my next one is a 5. So 5 plus 4 is 9, which means I fail, so I take a wound. And now this miniature is unconscious. And here is the end of turn for Ariana. As you can see, I'm now unconscious. Okay, round 3, turn 2, Nomads. So my turn as the active player. Well, I have 2 miniatures that are unconscious, so they cannot generate a regular order, and 1 that is in a conscious state. So I only get 1 regular order. Spending that order on the only miniature that is available, I declare movement as my first short movement skill, and I decide to move up here. I don't see the point in ducking and weaving sometimes, so I'm just going to move up and be in the open. My opponent declares ballistics a skill because now this miniature has line of fire to this miniature, so they can declare an ARO, which is ballistic attack. And then I'm going to do the same, ballistic attack. So we measure for range, it's 7 inches, so this is actually quite interesting. My ballistic skill is 11, I get +3 for range, but -3 for cover, because my opponent is touching this piece of cover, so they get the cover save. Sorry, the -3 for cover, which means I'm hitting on flats, 11. My opponent is ballistic skill 10, 0 for range because it's less than 8 inches from their weapon, so they don't get a modifier to their ballistic skill for range, and they get a -3 ballistic skill because I am in cover. So that makes them 7. So I get 3 dice to roll with 11 or less, and my opponent gets 1 dice to roll on a 7 or less. So as you can see, 3 dice plus a high number gives me a higher probability of success for this turn. And here's the results. Miss, miss, success, and a miss. So I get 1 success, which means the opponent gets 1 hit. So obviously the damage of my weapon is 13. They roll an 11. Now, because they got 1 armor, you add that to the 11, which makes it 12. And because they're in cover, they get +3. So that makes it 15. So the 15 in total is higher than 13, so they don't take a wound. And that's the end of my turn, because I've only got 1 order. It was that quick. Obviously, this is a later photo where they actually move up to here. I wasn't very reliable in taking the photos at the end of my turn. It was sort of at the end of everything. Okay, round 4, turn 1, Ariadna. So they've got 2 miniatures on the table. They generate 2 orders. Spending first order, my opponent declares short movement skill of move, and they move up closer. I declare ballistic attack because I can see them along that range, and I choose to shoot them at this point. And they choose to shoot back as well. So that's what it looks like here. This is the Ariadna player. That's the Nomad player. Okay, we measure for distance as range, 7 inches. And it wouldn't matter if they decided to shoot from here because it was under 7 inches anyway. So anything less than 8 for the Ariadna player was going to be no modification to the ballistic skill. Okay, so they get success value of 7, but they get to roll 3 dice. For me, it's just flat 11, 1 dice. So I miss, and they get 2 misses because the 9's higher than 7, 20 is obviously higher than 7, but again, they get a critical. So that means I have to make 2 armor saves. So the damage of their weapon is 13. I roll 2 die. Now, because I'm in cover, I get +3 for armor save, and I've already got 1 armor on my unit, so that's 4. So 8 plus 4 is 12. 12 is less than 13, I'll take a wound. 6 plus 3 for cover is 9, plus 1 for armor is 10. That's less than 13, so I take 2 wounds, which means I enter the dead state. So that miniature is removed from play. And that is end of the game. Okay, so I hope this tutorial was helpful for new players. I know it's a bit long, it's about 45 minutes, so I apologize. Please feel free to put comments below if you want me to clarify anything in terms of the rules. However, this is the basic core mechanic for Infinity. So if you can understand this is pretty much what you'll do for 95% of your games. It's basically moving against each other and shooting. The next tutorial will cover a little bit more in detail, and it will include the use of a lieutenant, which is actually quite important, and add another unit profile. So we'll have 4 miniatures in total. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something for this tutorial, and it was quite clear. I know I made a few mistakes, so I apologize. I'll do better in the next tutorial. So take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.